Hi, welcome back. I'm Chris from We Communicate. I'm a French teacher for adults, and in this video I'd like to tell you about the 65-year-old student who signed up for a 5-year master's degree at the same time I was doing my degree. The fella's name is Stefan. He's a real person, he really did exist, and I think it taught us all, my fellow students and myself, something about formal learning later in life, about age and about the labels we put on age. And what this experience brought me, personally, is a sense of perspective I think I'll always be grateful for, on what's humanly achievable once we set our mind to something. So here's the full story. When I signed up for my degree at university, I was already 34 and considered myself to be quite old. I'd quit high school some 15 years earlier, enrolled at university and suffered for the next 5 years. And if you're not familiar with European universities, I think it's worth giving you some background to better understand Stefan's journey as well as my own. So they don't have in Europe, they don't have a clientele-based system as they do in the UK and in the US. So it's not a system in which you pay a high fee to become a customer. What that means is that university in Europe is literally the trenches. There's massive amounts of work thrown at you, lots of sleepless nights, last-minute cramming, zero care for mental health or student satisfaction, zero counselling, no mentors, zero compromise or talks with the professors. It's 100% teacher-centred. They're a bit like little gods in a bubble, and they throw insane amounts of work at you, and they just say, well, know it. You have one chance at passing your exam, and if you fail, well, you're out and no one cares. It's like you never existed. I mean, my brother has a PhD in a completely unrelated field at a completely different university, agronomy. That's what he studied, and it's all the same story everywhere. Messy photocopies of jumbled up scribblings as course notes, arrogant teachers, cramming, lots of cramming, power plays in which you get flunked at the exam because the teacher didn't like your attitude during the year. And I had that also, by the way. And I'm painting a picture of European universities that are not fun. They're brutal, to use a fashionable adjective. And in the middle of it all, there was 60-year-old Stefan. We have to understand clearly that 65-year-old Stefan wasn't stepping into a comfortable environment in which all you had to do was attend a few classes a week, shake hands with the teacher and say, oh, that was an interesting lecture, see you next week. I can literally say that for 5 years, I didn't have a weekend off. It was a 7-day-a-week operation. It was mental, but it was also physical because you could never settle into a rhythm. And what I mean is, you might have an 8 a.m. lecture on Monday, nothing for 4 hours, so you have a 4-hour gap in your day, and then another lecture at 2 p.m. So what do you do with those 4 hours between lectures? Well, you can't get ahead with your work because they don't give you the course notes until the last minute, and there are reasons for that. The next day, your first lecture might be at 12 this time, but this time you have 4 hours straight. It's like a concertina, so there are 2 intense cramming periods during the exams, and in between there's a lot of reading, writing, typing, going to lectures. It's non-stop, and it's really taxing mentally and physically because there's no time to, for example, to make friends or to socialise. You go to the lecture, you leave, you go back home, or you find yourself a spot on campus to type your scribblings back into your computer, which takes you another 2 hours. You're always alone, you're always under pressure. It's very repetitive, it's very gloomy, very grim. So here is Stefan, 65, in the middle of all this mess, signing up for a master's in literature and linguistics, and if I remember correctly, his majors were English and Italian. So the backstory of Stefan is that he had a bachelor's that he'd earned 40 years earlier, and that left him with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He'd always wanted to have a master's because he told me that his brother had a master's and he was seen as the less intelligent of the two, so he did his bachelor's, but he always secretly wanted a master's. So the day he retired, he went for it, and he did a full-time master's degree for 5 years. Stefan passed every year with grande distinction, as they called it. So there's a pass, there's a distinction, there's grande distinction, which is high distinction, and then there's la plus grande distinction, when you're the absolute best student of your year, you're the absolute best. But he had grande distinction every year. The guy was 65 and he passed all the courses that were memory based and purposely designed to weed out the less deserving students, such as philosophy, for example, and all the other memory based courses. There wasn't just philosophy. He had to learn Italian also at 65. He had to perform at the exams for which there's only one shot, so it's a very high pressure environment. It's extremely taxing physically and mentally because the way it's organized, you might have 3 exams 3 days in a row, but then nothing for 10 days, so you lose your momentum and you don't want to burn out, so you don't know whether to rest or to continue working. Then there might be an exam, a break for 3 days, then another 2 exams, which might be the hardest of all at the end. And in the meantime, you've been under immense mental stress during the cramming period that can go up to 3 weeks. So it's really spread out in a very irregular way, and it's extremely, extremely exhausting. And if you think you flunked the exam, well, you've got to get back on the horse because tomorrow there's another exam and you might only sleep for 5 hours that night. And the guy did that at 65, you know. By the way, I have to say, you usually have no idea what the exam is actually about, because when you sit passively on a chair from September to December, then you have your first series of exams, writing down what the teacher's been saying, you're not internalizing it, so you're not structuring it in your mind. You're not ready for this knowledge to be used actively, and by the time December comes round, you have no idea what the teacher was talking about on Tuesday the 19th of October 2 months earlier. During the lectures, the teacher might tell us, for example, about the Harlem Renaissance and the key figures of that movement. But it's more than just agreeing and nodding and saying, oh yeah, that was interesting, yeah, the Harlem Renaissance, yeah, no. At the exam, you have to name all the key players and the major pieces and the dates, and by the way, the Harlem Renaissance is just one paragraph on one page. There's another 100 pages probably to know of countless other names and dates across the different periods from the 1300s to the 20th century, and you have to memorize all of this, usually the night before the exam. And by the way, Stefan did this in English, which wasn't his native language, it was French. I was friendly with Stefan and I spoke to him probably at least once a week. He didn't have any strikingly unusual mental capacities. He was what you might call an ordinary bloke. And the fact is that he set his mind to it and succeeded. And I heard him speak Italian with the Italian baristas that sold coffee on campus, and he seems to have done that well also. Naturally, the whole experience exhausted him, and if I remember correctly, he took antidepressants, but then again, other people did, younger people did also, just to get through it. Because in Europe you might know that mental health and student satisfaction are not words that are commonly used. And I'll end this video by showing you a few pages of some printed course notes that we had at university and the level of detail they contain. Stefan, 65, had to know this, as we all did, and you memorize this the night, usually the night before the exam. So this is page 120 appearing on the screen, and it's all about modernism and the exploration of the inner self. And I remember discovering these course notes, literally discovering them the day before the exam, and I got 17 out of 20. I had to cram the whole thing the night before. I'll never forget it. So typically the teacher might start with a general question about modernism and then go into specific works, and you have to name them all, you have to locate them within the movement, and you have to be able to discuss them, and this is the way we studied it. And Stefan, 65, did it also. So this is called Modernism and the Exploration of the Inner Self, the Emergence of the Unconscious in Art and Science. It starts with a picture of René Magritte's La Voix du Sang, 1959. A surrealist painting draws its inspiration from the unconscious. You have to memorize that. So if the teacher, for example, asks you, why did I put a picture of a tree there with René Magritte, you have to be able to explain why it's in there. You might have to give the date. You might have to say who René Magritte was. There is a remarkable parallelism between the emergence of modernism and the elaboration of depth psychology, it tells us. This parallelism is more than a matter of chronological simultaneity. The interest for the inner self directly shaped the evolution of literature from the late 19th to the early 20th century as writers endeavoured to go beyond. You have to be able to explain this at the exam, right? You have to internalise it, memorise it and know it actively. Teacher goes on to say, it would be mistaken, however, to assume that the depth psychology abruptly emerged in art and science in the last decade of the 19th century. Interest for various manifestations of the subconscious had been building up for about a century in European literature and culture. And we have illustrations of this with dates, of course. So Horace Walpole's Gothic classic, The Castle of Otranto. So a teacher might say, okay, why did I put a picture of the Castle of Otranto? What's the date exactly? He might ask a question about the 1939 film of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. He might ask a question about that. And then on page 121, he goes on to say, by the late 18th century, the development of the Gothic novel and of romantic aesthetics. He mentions William Wordsworth, Emily Bronte. You have to know all these dates. You have to know their works, the dates, the reason there's pictures here. And then he goes on to say, he mentions Dr. Franz Anton Mesmer. He mentions animal magnetism. So he might ask you, why did I mention animal magnetism? What is that? Hypnosis? How does that work? Jean-Martin Charcot, you have to know these people, the dates. Charles Darwin, you have to know why he mentioned Charles Darwin. It's the level of detail is amazing. Then he goes on to mention William James. You have to know those dates. You have to know what stream of consciousness is. Emily Durkheim, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Theodore Dreiser, André Gide, Les Caves du Vatican. You see, I'm not exaggerating. You have to know why the teacher mentioned that. You have to know it for the exam, or you won't pass your oral. Then there's a passage on Henri Bergson with his picture, the date, Sigmund Freud. You see, it's quite deep. 1898, and I don't know how he did it. The level of details he goes on to speak about. The artistic appropriation of theories of the unconscious. In aesthetic terms, the idea of unconscious realms within the human mind lent itself to several appropriations. You have to transform this into human language and be able to discuss this at the oral. I don't know how we did it. So all this to say that Stefan did this at 65 and much more. That's only 2 pages. So to the question, can I learn French as an adult? The answer is a resounding yes. I already know you can. It's a matter of reversing the process. Yes, you can be a speaker of French. You already are a speaker of French. Now you just have to become it. Of course you can. Yes, you can absolutely become a speaker and a user of French. So you might have to find yourself a nice structured system to learn it in, such as I propose, but yes, you can absolutely do it. Just think of Stefan and the work he put in at 65. I have full faith. I know you can do it. It's extremely doable. My name is Chris from We Communicate. I hope this story was inspiring. See you soon. Bye.